Mama. I'm Courtney Cecil, proud mom of 2 boys and an organizational culture and behavior change executive. And I'm a believer in building a movement to help the burned out, overwhelmed working moms reclaim their control and free time so that they can confidently remain in the workforce without losing the sanity or themselves. Now, let's get started.
Hey y'all, I'm your host, Courtney Cecil, and welcome back to another episode of the Life Management System. And in this episode, y'all, I am so excited to host Zach Watson. I'm sure many of you are familiar with him from your days and doom scrolling on the internet because he has been such a fabulous sensation for those of us who are really tuned into the mental load. So Zach, if you are not aware, is a mental load coach, and he specifically trains men to understand the invisible labor and improve their emotional fluency. So Zach, welcome to the Life Management System.
Thank you, Courtney. I appreciate you having me, and that was a pretty delightful intro. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have the fireworks. I really wanted to, but the police out front said that was inappropriate. So you're just gonna have to go with me instead. But if I was hosting you on a stage, know that there would be fireworks too. So what's really cool that Zach and I just discovered is when I first met him, he was talking about his professional background and how he got into becoming a mental load coach. And it wasn't until I was doing my due diligence before just getting on here to make sure I knew who I was talking to that I discovered that you were also an industrial engineer. So before we get into this, for the people that have been with me for the past couple years, they know I'm an industrial and systems engineer. They know what it means, and they know why that's such a foundation to how I support women in the mental load. But for those of listeners that aren't aware of what industrial engineering is, I would love for you to just start before we get into the bulk of the questions on the 101 of what IE is and what the big takeaway is that you've learned from your technical foundation that you believe prepares you. And I'm putting Zach on the spot here. He does not know that I was going to ask this, but what's a piece of your background that you think is relevant to or prepared you, regardless if it's the IE or some of your teaching career or whatever it may be, that prepares you to be a mental load coach?
So, I mean, I think teaching definitely prepped me much more fully to talk about this topic because teachers do so much emotional labor. Teachers have so much mental load managing IEPs, managing like the curriculum, doing the domestic labor of your classroom that only you're accountable for. And you got to figure out if you're going to do the emotional labor and or mental load of teaching your students to help you and delegate, sharpening pencils and handing out binders and putting them back away and making sure that the books are taken care of. When I think about industrial engineering and like the efficiency of things, I think when I look at the problem solving, like the slightly more hands-on solutions approach that I offer to a lot of guys, I think that when I think about like project management and like how, like, so I was in sales for 2 years at a software company. When I was doing that, it was really efficient for me to grow and improve quickly by having a weekly conversation with my manager, which was built into like the expectations I had as a salesperson. But when I was doing that, um, I was getting consistently better at like coming to that call, like having things prepared. So like if I wanted some critiquing on one of the cold calls that I did or one of the sales conversations that I had, showing up to that call and having like, hey, here's the call that I had, here's the critiquing I would like to have, significantly efficient to show up every week prepared to learn. And I think that similar meeting of like my goal in that moment is to grow. That's a lot of what I think I'm teaching a lot of the guys to do is host that meeting with your partner. So I think there's a lot of when we talk about the mental load and the management of it, the hard part of handing it off, I think a lot of times from the women that are carrying the brunt of it and the men that are I think there's genuinely a ton of men that are trying to own more of the mental load and they just don't have great systems for it. And so by having a weekly meeting where you're forcing yourself to look ahead at, okay, what the hell is going on in my house right now? What's going on in our calendar the next 1 to 3 months? Like, what are the things going on in our lives that I can talk about with her and beat her to the punch on? Sally's got a birthday party, a birthday coming up in 3 months, and I know that my wife is going to manage all of it, and she's going to be mad when she comes, when we're a month out and she's already done all this thinking and I'm 5 pages behind her. Like I can start thinking about these things ahead of time. So when it comes to like efficiency of problem solving and efficiency of owning mental load, where I know I almost had the luxury of I learned about it kind of first, or at least I had the language for it before my wife did. So I was beating her to the punch at least on having some of those conversations. But um, I think that that is where we get really inefficient is the learning curve that men have around understanding invisible labor.
Yeah. So a couple things that I want to double click on and call out that you just talked about, Zach. The first is being that having the systems in place, and we'll talk more about what that looks like and how the type of systems you help people put in through focusing on invisible labor. Having the systems in place is what's ultimately going to lead to that more efficient and effective household, or as I call it, the end-to-end life management system. The other thing that you inadvertently said that I think is really important to call out is that so often people don't think they can problem solve. They just feel like because there's tension in life, particularly with my audience, I focus exclusively on working moms. It's easy to say, this is just a phase in life. But you and I are trained professional problem solvers, and we're like, I'm going to call bullshit on that. That
Mm,
we like, there is a way to fix this. We just have to, you know, kind of back up the car a little bit and continue reversing and putting it in a drive again until we figure out a path that actually works. But most problems that people think they have because it's just the phase of life they're in doesn't necessarily need to be that way. Just because you have young kids doesn't mean you can't sleep. Just because you have a partner who did not grow up in a household with more equitable sharing of the workload doesn't mean that can't be fixed either. Like we're both committed to not just helping others do that, but we're committed to helping others because we started by committing to helping ourselves.
yeah. And I think I'm going to add on to as I was thinking about what you're saying there is the other reason I think industrial engineering and being specifically a math teacher, I think has helped me with this is we were trained to quantify the cost of things. So as a math teacher, you're trying to sell math to teenagers, which they're like, hell no. So I remember there were so many conversations I was having with my students that went off the handlebars because, the kid comes in just talking, they're all excited about this YouTuber. I was like, oh, well, you're excited. They're making a bunch of money. Let's calculate that. So you're constantly taking moments where they're excited about something and you're trying to quantify it and like have that conversation about what does this cost? I think similarly in the home, like the minutes that are ticking by as invisible labor is going by, and or the inefficiencies of emotional conversations when like the other night Alyssa shared that she was feeling hurt about the fact that I really want to have compost in our backyard and she doesn't want it to smell. She doesn't want rodents or insects in there aggressively. She doesn't want to own it or manage it, but she's okay as long as I actually teach myself and I learn about how to do it correctly. She's fine with me doing it as long as I like own it fully. The past 2 days, I recognized it wasn't wet enough from some of what I was reading. I let it open, it downpoured, and now it smells. So there was this moment of like, I was having inefficient conversations with her about it and saying, here's what I've learned, here's what I'm implementing. And now instead, we've had one or two emotional conversations where she's been annoyed about it. You don't sometimes there's a little resentment that builds when you can't have that conversation and I'm not standing right there with you. Um, so yeah, I think the quantification of problems is something that I think has been a little bit more prepared than your average person.
Yeah. So there too, one of the things that you specifically said that's important to pinpoint is the owning end to end. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit, but you owning the composting end to end really means end to end. And I think that that's an important difference of why couples sometimes will trip over themselves
Mhm.
if you don't have that clarification of what the roles and responsibilities really look like, and what the scope of that is. But we'll dig into more of that here in a bit. I want to kind of pull that thread on you in the education field specifically. So right now, you predominantly focus on education and coaching regarding mental load and invisible and emotional labor.
Mm-hmm.
And I guarantee that 90+% of my audience feels that really hard. But here's the problem, Zach. They feel the weight of carrying that emotional load and that invisible labor. But until they're actually broken, they don't feel as compelled to fix it. Women in particular, moms in particular, will continue to take the burden of something without actually like essentially they'll sacrifice themselves. They'll sacrifice their own sanity. They'll sacrifice everything until it's actually broken. So it
Mm-hmm.
isn't until something needs to happen with their marriage or something needs to happen to help their kids that they actually invest in themselves and invest in fixing things. But I believe and getting ahead of those, if you're starting to see those symptoms, getting ahead of it, what do you believe the risk is, particularly as it relates to relationships, knowing that that's where you spend a lot of your space? If these women are feeling the weight of that load, but aren't actually doing anything about it, like they haven't gotten to the point where it's broken yet.
When I think about how to serve the men that I serve, I'm constantly thinking about how much skin in the game do I have to have them see and feel and appreciate. I think in a good sales conversation, you're getting somebody present to the pain and the cost of something if they don't fix it. Um, and I think broken is when like you hit a threshold of cost that is like too clear to not that you can't not see it. And so I think for someone that's like wondering how much it weighs on them, I would encourage to look at like what is the cost of it. Similar to, my wife is a coach too for she helps couples and use the connection codes methodology. And oftentimes what she will talk with them is about what is the cost of you not sharing your feelings with each other, or what is the cost of you like there's a lot of moments where maybe I'm not fully expressing what I need to say, what I'm feeling with her, and if I am not expressing that, then the cost is me being able to appreciate time with her, me being able to feel confident in a room with her if I'm holding on to something. So I think like the main thing we're constantly thinking about is money in a capitalist society, but there's so many other metrics that we can look at the cost of things. So it's the cost of like closeness with your partner. When we think about, I know there's a lot of moments when Alyssa and I are talking about, should we pay for the extra couple hours of our toddler being in childcare, which we can always take her early out of, right? She doesn't have to go to that, and we can pay for it. But when both of us are sleep deprived, we haven't had sex for a couple weeks, when we haven't had a date and we are not feeling connected, how much worse of parents are we showing up as for our child when we're not feeling connected? How much worse modeling are we giving them of what good relationship looks like when we're not feeling connected? So I think there's a lot of intangible ways that we can kind of look at if you were to create some like North Stars for what your life looks like financially, spiritually, career, connected with your family, your children. Um, I'm sure a bunch of people could list, I don't know, 5 or 10 different like North Star directions. Like if you take on a job and you get a lot more money, one of the other bars might go down. And so looking at if you're not approaching this issue because you don't want to do the emotional labor of having this conversation with your partner, and like the cost, like right now you're not paying for conflict, like that is the cost you're avoiding, but the cost that you are paying is like not feeling authentic, not feeling connected with your partner because you guys are not on the same page about something. So I think looking at the sacrifices that are, I can't tell if I'm talking in circles anymore. Is my answer making sense?
No, it does. Yeah, and most especially you said two things that really spoke to me And the one is the example you're setting for your kids.
Mm,
That connection that you and your partner have of them getting to see what healthy relationships looks like is important because if they don't have healthy relationships modeled for them, then they're likely to perpetuate the same cycle in their generation.
mm,
So I really love that you drew attention to that, Zach. And I also, I think that you were kind of alluding to this, but life's too short to not be happy. And if you are in a relationship where you feel like you are just roommates or there's imbalance or you don't respect each other or that you like you'll eventually start to resent one another and that resentment carries with you. And when there is when there are frameworks like you and I teach that can help bridge the gaps that couples are experiencing, then why not? Like why not choose happiness and choose leaning in for each other? Um, for yourselves, but even if you can't do it for yourselves, even if it feels like too much to work to do for yourselves, do it to set that example for your kids. So they
mm.
get to see what a healthy couple looks like. They get to see what a healthy balance at home looks like.
Yeah.
So, speaking of balance at home, that is something that you and I both focus on, most particularly around the way that history biases some
Yeah.
of the family norms that we have now. So, I tend to focus more on the pressure that women have, whether that be meeting the standards of what good home care looked like because their mom stayed at home and they got to be like Martha Stewart every weekend, or whether that be the way that they show up at their kids' classroom parties and that sort of thing. Like their standards that they're comparing to history, but you also focus a good bit on history, particularly as it relates to those gender role norms that exist, whether that be at home or outside the home, but
Mhm.
how society has and continues to perpetuate those traditional gender roles. Can you say a little bit more about that and what some of your stronger observations have been?
So I'm gonna talk a little bit about like millennial dads that I think a lot of us grew up with, like Homer Simpson, maybe Phil from Modern Family, Two and a Half Men, Alan Harper. Who's the other one I'm thinking of? Um, Everyone Loves Raymond,
Mhm.
Ray Romano. A lot of us were modeled. There are episodes, I think, for multiple of them where weaponized incompetence is seen as like a comedy piece in those shows. I wish I could name it off the top of my head what episode to watch, but um, there's an episode where Deborah calls out Ray. It's like, did you pretend to not be able to do this so that you wouldn't have to do it anymore? And that's exactly what he did. So I think a lot of us millennial dads that kind of grew up with that, I think for a lot of us, it's not funny to us, but I think we're comparing ourselves to these like kind of bumbling idiot kind of dads.
Mhm.
And that is what is modeled for us. And so when I say modeled for us, that ends up, it's not even necessarily that we're aspiring to do that, but that's the bar we're now comparing ourselves to. From what I've seen in coaching and a lot of the guys that I've interacted with now, I think that that is a significantly lower bar than we're all actually working at.
Mhm.
Um, Now, I could be totally wrong, and it's really hard to tell sometimes because I know that the with getting a couple hundred or thousands of comments every week, I can get kind of jaded on like thinking what how the world works and like how angry women generally are at men because that tends to be what I see in a lot of my comment sections. But I think that a lot of guys are trying a lot harder to be good versions of themselves, and I think we need to elevate the level of who we're comparing ourselves to.
Mhm.
And we might not like, I'm really curious as to what was modeled for a lot of these guys because I think most of us are doing better than our dads too.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time, I think like as much as I love my dad, like he was significantly ahead of his time. Like uh, he would cry. Like I got
Mhm.
that modeled for me, so I saw
Mhm.
that it was okay to cry. Um, my mom was the main breadwinner and had the one consistent job all of my all of my childhood, versus he had like 5 or 6 different careers, not even just jobs. Like he cooked, he cleaned, he did all the different things. Now he did a lot of domestic labor. As I'm leaning more into invisible labor, I'm seeing how much the mental load my mom still owns for sure. Like he was asking for where the cleaning supplies were to my mom the other day, and he's lived there for 30 something years. So a lot of who we're comparing ourselves to are not great benchmarks. And I think it's worthwhile for the guys. Actually, one of the guys in my community, Mental Load Mastery, was saying that his therapist had encouraged him to create like a persona of like an ideal dad that he would like to compare himself to, which I used to do this on first day of math class, is what does the ideal student look like? What does the ideal teacher look like? So that you have a, when you're comparing yourself to a low bar, then you sink towards that low bar. But if you're comparing yourself to someone that is arguably more challenging to become, then you end up like kind of jumping higher towards that. So I think that, well, with a lot of the trad wife movement, I think that it's scary thinking about how many, in like a lot of the manosphere, it's scary thinking about how many people are like trying to send us back to the 50s, which is wild to me. But I think for the most part, that I think there's a lot of guys that are trying to do more than we think they are. And it's just the measure of the bar that we're looking at is too low.
Yeah, I really appreciate that analogy. Did not expect that answer.
Mm.
And I would agree with you. I mean, I think about my husband, Richard. He's a very present, very active dad in ways that our dads were not. Our dads were fantastic and they were present for us. They never, like my dad, I played 6 varsity sports. He never missed anything. He was
Mhm.
there for all of it. But he just turned 70 and he's also asking my mom how to start a load of laundry because he's never learned how to do it.
Wow.
So he was the primary breadwinner in our house, but the actual domestic labor was very much my mom's responsibility, and the same with my father-in-law. Now, my husband does a fantastic job helping, but we also have equally as demanding of careers, so it's the only way that it can do it. But he tends to take some of those more visible tasks,
Mhm.
and to your point, he really, as with most, I think, as with most men, they really are trying. But there's still a lot that they don't even see that they're falling short on. And the perfect example is what you're sharing around your dad, having
Yeah.
to ask where the cleaning supplies are. Do you believe that there is a general sense of awareness that most men have on how, like, they might be taking some of that physical load off, but the invisible load is still very much invisible to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the guys that come into my community that come to work with me, I think a lot of them have a lot better idea than I think the men that are getting talked about in my comment section. So I
Yeah.
think, for them to have shown up, for them to have registered, like I would say the the majority of them have those baseline understandings and can articulate things. Um, and then there's plenty of guys in there that are really crushing it and are like they could have a similar conversation that you and I are able to have because I've seen them do all of their homework in there. Um, but yeah, I think all the time I ask myself, like, what do they need? What do my people need to hear today? And there are so many moments when I have to remember, like, there's still like a billion people out there that still have never heard the word mental. There's still like a
Mm.
billion men out there that don't know the difference between mental load and domestic labor. So, um, Gary Vee talks about like if you were to be a content creator, like you got to be committed to saying pretty much one thing for all of your career and weave it into 1,000 different stories. And I think I need to keep remembering that there's so many people that don't have the language to articulate mental load, and it just needs to be keep being told and told slightly differently every time, so that I like I had a client last year, and he's like, Zach, I used to hate your face. Like my wife would send me her videos. I would like the moment I saw your face, I was like, oh, I'm gonna hate this. And apparently it was probably 20 videos had been sent over, and finally I reached him the day when I made it was a little skit of me at a green screen behind me of like a grocery store, and I was pretend calling my wife, asking where things were in the grocery store, rather than asking like an attendant that worked there. And he told me that he was not quite sold, but like he was converted to being willing to hearing what I had to say because he had just done that like 30 minutes before his wife had sent him that video. So I'd like to think that everyone is like reachable, and it just takes like the right context, the right story, to have them see it for themselves.
I can appreciate why that is also extra relevant, like reaching people at the right time at the right place. So ironic to this conversation, just last night, my husband was asking me what I wanted to do for Mother's Day. And I was like, well, it's funny you asked that. I'm interviewing my friend Zach Watson tomorrow, and here's what he'd have to say about that.
What did you say that I would have to say about it? I'm
Well,
curious.
I showed him the skit that you created and that you just recently posted
Hmm.
on essentially you as a woman saying back to him, I trust that you know me well enough to be able to come up with solutions on your own without having to make me do the thinking for you.
Yeah.
And ironically, and I was trying to explain this to our friends. Tomorrow we're going out. It's gonna be a great day. We're after the my boys' soccer and football practice. We are going to meet some of our closest Charlotte friends at a restaurant, and then we're going to do an escape room with the kids. We'll see how that goes. But we get slimed at the end of it if we lose. So it does sound epic. But both of the boys said like, "This is your all's day. You all plan it." And I was trying to explain to them, I'm like, if it's
Mm,
our day, why do we have to plan it? Like we're doing it as a family. Why can't y'all do the planning for us? So it's completely lost on them until you're in, to your point, Zach, in the right circumstance at the right time where it clicks, because
mm,
you're able to spin the mirror around and be like, actually, you are projecting, even though you think you have great intent, you're projecting the hard work back on me.
yeah.
And until you're in the right place at the right time, you just underappreciate that you're actually doing that.
Yeah. And I think, if I were to try to explain to like your husband or, another guy, I would say like, do you want to have like an awesome dinner? Okay, cool. You plan it, you buy it, you cook it, you present it. And my first thought, especially, is I love when Alyssa rarely cooks, but I know like when my mom cooks, like I love the experience of she just asked whether I wanted steak or not. I'm like, yep. And then, she does kind of the rest. Like the experience of not having to put any thought into something feels so luxurious that I think we underestimate the value and experience that that can bring.
Mhm.
Especially because when you're chest deep in the planning of something, like, on your slime thing, right? If you were in all the planning of it and something goes like a little bit off, kids probably won't know the difference. They're still gonna love it. Versus you're looking at that moment like, "Oh, I really want to do this thing too."
Mhm.
So like there's even some of the disappointment of plans not fully working out, or when I'm cooking like, a HelloFresh meal or something that like, has a little more oomph to it, and it's not just chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. And I screw up or I burn something or I have to toss something out, the timing's not right. Like I see that, but Alyssa might not see that. And like as the planner, as the creator, as the person that's doing that, like the vision that we have on those things, there's even that added layer of disappointment when things don't show up the way that we had originally wanted to.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think of, I think one of the phrases that it occurs to me a lot of people have heard on their wedding day or around their wedding time was happy wife, happy life, which I
Mhm.
think this encapsulates what you were just describing there. Um, which is it starts out with I remember when Alyssa and I were first dating, when we were moving into an apartment together, it would be like, oh, what do you want for dinner? Oh, I don't care. Like, what do you want for dinner, honey? And I would be like, I will be easy. I will be simple. We can have whatever you want to have. I will be malleable. And I think when we start out, that sounds super sweet. Like, oh, we'll get whatever I want. Well, I want Mexican, honey. Whatever you want, Mexican it is, honey. And I think at the start it sounds like happy wife happy life is like they get to make the decision so that they get what they wanted, and slowly over time that slowly morphs into they have to make the decisions, um, and then they have the burden of having to curate that experience. So I think that was a lot of what Alyssa and I went through. I don't think we've mentioned this, but actually the way that you and I bumped into each other actually at Mom 2.0 was I was wearing my recovering man child shirt.
Yep.
And I feel like that has been a huge part of my journey is um, seeing how happy wife, happy life used to be. Yeah, Alyssa, like we'll do whatever you want. Like it's fine. Um, and slowly it became like she had to make the decisions about things. And I think that's the when we can look and see the invisible work and we can see the whole experience of something, not just the experience, but the project management of that experience,
Mhm.
and we can see the entire amount of work that encapsulates it, then I think you can see how, oh, yeah, that's not really a gift for them to plan out Mother's Day. It's the the gift is for them to experience Mother's Day.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. So you also, as you're talking about this, we're talking about a lot of the comments that you get on a day-to-day basis where your actual clients might have an elevated sense of stewardship and helping balance things a little bit more at home. That's
Mm.
clearly not the case for a lot of your community and a lot of my community. So what would you say to the women whose husband isn't compelled to change because he's either not bothered by it or it doesn't feel broken to him? And how would you inspire him or inspire his partner, the female, to help him get to care, get to a place of care?
I have two answers for this question. And my question back to you is, do you want me speaking advice to the women or advice to the men as if they're like, hey, we're going to listen to this podcast together?
I think it's probably going to be the women because the women are going to be listening to this. And until, to your point, of people sharing your content over and over, the men aren't going to get there on their own. So how can we help the listeners facilitate their partners getting to that place?
So first thing I'm going to say, I don't love my answer about this because by you asking me this requires more emotional labor of women to get this desired result.
Mhm.
So I don't actually make 90-second clips on this because I get a comment section full of women being like, Zach, fuck you. Like,
Oh
I, th- I,
gosh.
th- I thought you said that like your whole account is telling us to not have to do more emotional labor, yet this is giving us tips on how to do better emotional labor. So I don't make videos, small videos on this, but within
Yeah.
the context of a podcast, it works. Um, so just a caveat to the women listening, like I think that the easiest way, so if you're already doing the emotional labor and you want to take that same energy and just reapply it to a slightly in a different way, this is what I would encourage. When I was a math teacher, I found that there are a lot of moments when my students would say, you plus it with the three, you times it by that. And the math teacher in me that has a college degree, I'm saying, no, 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 it's the sum of these two things. It's the product of these two numbers. So I'm wanting to use mathematical language, but there's a lot of times when I need to speak their language. I need to say, yeah, you plus it by that thing, you times it by that. Similarly, if we want the men to better understand the invisible layer around us, I think labeling is the easiest way that you don't have to have crazy conversations with them. You don't have to have a come to Jesus talk with them about anything. You just start sprinkling it in. So, what I highly encourage, yes, takes emotional labor to when you have opportunities to give compliments, give acknowledgments, give gratitude for moments when your partner is doing invisible labor. So when he comes home and he is saying, God, John keeps forgetting his time card. I'm going to have to slack him again on Monday morning that he forgot his time card if he wants to get paid. Wow, honey, it sounds like you have to hold the mental load for John for his time card all the time. Yeah, yeah, I guess I do hold the mental load for him. Yeah. So then he has to battle with either what is mental load and or
Mhm.
yeah, okay, I understand, I can understand that word. Um, Man, every time I talk with this client, I swear to God, it's like a therapy session. Wow, it sounds like you do a lot of emotional labor for that client. What's that like for you? Oh, well, I mean, it's just like I have to manage my temper and I have to slow down with them. Yeah, that is some crazy emotional labor. It's like what we do with the kids, isn't it? So what you've just done there is you've armed him with some language that he can see that he takes ownership of, but
Mhm.
also that when it comes up, when you planted these seeds and like you've made investment in him seeing that vocabulary, a month later, 2 months later, and you're stressed out because you've been with the kids all day and he wants to go mow the lawn, and you're like, hey, I've been doing the emotional labor of managing our sick toddler along with our 5-year-old that's just been going nuts and stir crazy all day. Like can I mow the lawn and not have to do any more of that emotional labor? And I think, in my experience, I think those men are going to be much more receptive to hearing that critique using those words because they've already seen where they're doing that labor. And so
Mhm.
similarly, I think obviously because I talk about it 24/7, but it's so much easier for me to hear from Alyssa when she's saying like, "Hey, I don't want to own the mental load on this," because we're so well versed in that language. So I think when we can see it as an objective skill, as an objective piece that both of us own, it doesn't feel like a weapon. Versus, I know there's a lot of women there saying, "God, like I own all the mental load around here," and he's like, "Fuck is mental load? Like,
Yeah.
it's what are you talking about?" But if they can see it in their own context and that seed is planted for them and they've heard it a couple times, I think it's so much differently received.
And you talked a lot there too about emotional load too. And I think that there is a slight nuance between the difference of mental load and visual labor and emotional labor as well. And recognizing that all of those tend to traditionally fall with a female, and being able to use that language to articulate and call out that that does exist, that is a thing, that
Mhm.
steak dinner doesn't magically appear without the thought behind it. I appreciate your coaching there to all of us on how we can help build the muscle for our partners by first helping them identify and just simply helping them label.
Mm. Yeah, one of my favorite texts I received from my cousin the past year was he said, "Zach, you'd be so proud of me. I used the word mental load today." And he said, I was talking with a colleague and he was talking about his business and how he was like following up with clients. He was sick of following up with clients. He's like, "Yeah, it sounds like you own the mental load of following up with your clients." And he was so proud of himself for it that he'd like use it contextually, and he knows what I talk about all the time. But I think anytime that we're using new words, like I think there's a sense of joy typically. And so I think it's a great opportunity for us to broaden our vocabulary and shine a light where the light doesn't often shine.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, quickly moving on so we can wrap this up, Zach.
Mhm,
I know that you are such a believer in Eve Rodsky's fair play
mhm,
method. It's something that you and Alyssa use at home, but you're such a believer. You have actually become certified in
mhm.
as a coach there. Tell us a little bit about what that journey looks like for you that got you to that point, and some of what you believe is most applicable to helping apply her fair play principles in someone's day-to-day life.
So, I mean, my story started with generally being a content creator. If you want to wind way back, I started making YouTube videos to talk to my students in a different way. Uh, Eventually, it got in between me and Alyssa because I was taking way too much time editing. 2021 rolls around, and my students are bragging about their viral videos on TikTok. I'm like, this is trash. You guys don't even make good content. And then I got back into the content creation game when I realized I can make TikToks in like less than 10 minutes instead of editing for 45 to an hour. As in 2021, our daughter was born, I started talking about fatherhood on TikTok. And in about 3 weeks, when I was talking about how I was going on paternity leave for 12 weeks, and I was talking about like how we were managing our shifts in feeding and sleeping, a couple of viral videos brought me from about 2,000 to 50,000 followers. So quickly, I had a bunch of women following me saying, "This is a good dad. We should listen to this guy." Um, Over that next year, I asked my people like, what book should I read next? And I think all at once, like 5 people said Fair Play. So I was like, well, that's the answer to my question. Read Fair Play, started sharing my reflections on the book. And there were the first couple videos I was talking about. We pulled out the cards, we went on a date night. Fair Play, actually, they found out that I was talking about the book and they sent me the cards in the mail. I didn't even understand how they got my address, but um,
That's kind of creepy, actually.
it was
Amazing.
at first, and then I realized that like because I had like a wish list or something, that they had found my wish list, I think, or
On
something like that.
Amazon. Yeah.
Um, so we broke those out, and then the first couple videos that I made saying like I think I just added mental load for my wife, and then I was like I was kind of not sure if I was actually accurate or not. I was kind of testing the waters. So the first video was like 100,000 views, which was pretty good. I was like, well, I should probably talk about that again. So 2 days later made another video talking about it, and that landed at 6.4 million on TikTok, and I gained about almost 100,000 followers off that one video. And then what any good content creator does is they keep trying to make lightning strike again. So made another 10 videos that week. That was part 1 through 10 of mental load. Today I'm on part 312. So as I started talking about mental load, people were like, oh my God, like we need educational resources to explain this to the men in our lives. And I think as I kept hearing more and more of that, eventually I was like, okay, I need to put together something. So I got Fair Play certified and started giving the market what it was asking for, which was educational materials for me to kind of mansplain it to the men. So yeah, that's I at some point I had enough traffic and a couple of viral videos back in 2023. I had enough clients that I was able to quit my sales job, and so now I've been doing this full time for about a year and a half.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Fair play has just normalized so much of what people were always experiencing, but didn't have a language for. So I
Mm,
just am props to Eve Rotsky for normalizing and making household language out of some of the most fundamental challenges
mm,
of dual income life, especially, but just having healthy relationships, full stop. One of the things that I always work with my clients on is I don't get in quite the level of detail that someone like you would on this topic, but I always encourage my clients to just give away the big pieces and give away the full pieces to the men. Again, it's not as calculated as you might,
mm.
the process as you might be taking them through. But I think about a lot of my clients because they hold so much up here and it takes a lot more chiseling away to slowly move the mental load and redistribute it. That I'm like, we have to start somewhere. Let's start with the big pieces, like plating the dinner, like making the school lunches or that sort of thing, because at least
Interesting.
it is
I
all
might have
here.
a different way I go about it if I'm
Yeah.
hearing correctly.
Hmm.
So when we like once we get to about week 7 in the program, I have them do the 51% activity. So they're pretty much creating almost like they take all the fair play cards or create like an org chart of all the responsibilities in your home. And then you identify who has 51% of what.
Hmm.
And from there, what I typically, so it sounds like what you're saying is if mom is holding 99% of, weekday dinners, like put that on his plate. That's not how I go about it. If I'm
Hmm.
hearing that right of what you do, what I have them do is gain balance in owning the mental load of something. Now, I think it's slower, but I think it's more sustainable in my opinion. So what I might have them do if they're taking out the trash consistently, but they always need to be reminded, then for 2 weeks straight, I want them to commit to figuring out what they need to have done on an executive function level for them to not need any reminders from their wife so that she's gotten used to actually being able to close that tab on her browser
Yep.
and not have to own that, even though it's like pretty small. I think it gets him used to owning 100% of that and not having any of the mental load or the emotional labor land on her. And
Yeah,
slowly,
no. Yeah, I operate in very much the same spot.
okay.
I start instead of doing the full landscape of life, I just focus on the things that are bigger so like taking out the trash as an example, not to say it's not an inconvenience for most of us, but that's like a
Mhm.
3-second task. I just start on what are those biggest items that if you get that one thing figured out, that alone is a repeatable
Mhm.
45-minute task every single day.
Mhm.
Let's start there instead of doing the full end to end, which is what somebody like you would do with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of the guys that come to me, like they're already doing a significant amount of domestic labor, and
Hmm.
mental load is really the piece that the invisible piece is that's what's being worked on. So I think a lot of the guys that I'm seeing, like they're probably already doing a good handful of those big things.
Oh yeah.
And so now we're trying to complete the ownership because if we think about the 51% activity and like all the tabs I have open on my Chrome browser right now, like even if he owns 99% of something, that 1% that she owns of reminding him or like forgetting something, like that's still a tab open in her browser.
Yeah.
So I think optimizing how many tabs we can close out more so than, one of these tabs is just a reminder to set up an appointment versus one of these tabs is the book proposal I'm working on, where there's a ton of content on that one tab. So a lot of people are, it sounds like you're working on like, let's try to maybe not fully close out that tab or as much as we can, but I'd rather him take off one of those big chunk tabs rather than just closing out a whole one, even if it's a tiny one.
That's it.
Um,
Just like starting small. So like I get people from the floor
mhm,
to survival, and then you take
yeah,
them from survival to like
yeah,
next level.
that sounds accurate.
Yeah. Okay, so it is time to wrap up, Zach. Before we
Okay.
do lightning round questions, first, what is your go-to stress busting activity?
I've been thinking about this question all week. I don't think it's stress busting, but it's like it's my quick escape. Is I love playing chess, the chess.com app.
I'm not surprised by that. That's like that checks what I know about you. Okay, what's the book or podcast that you've been crushing on lately?
I've been listening to Jessica Turner's I Thought It Would Be Better Than This and realizing how much more I need to lean into my male friendships.
How about
Did
that's
not
pretty
seeing
awesome.
that, did not see that coming from that book.
Oh, that's I didn't either actually. Knowing the premise of
Mm,
Jessica's story, I didn't either. That's fantastic. And I'll link that in the show notes for anybody to check out as well. Okay, and then if you could wave a magic wand, what would you eliminate forever?
this I've also been thinking about all week, eating. Like I would just, if I could have a button and just like fill me up or if I don't want to be filled up and I want to enjoy a meal, then I can have that option. Like I would just love to have eating taken care of for me.
That's actually very genius because it takes up a lot of mental load, ironically, and a lot of purpose. But I always say sleep for a very similar reason,
Okay.
probably because
Yeah.
think about how much I could get done if I didn't have to sleep. Like just get juiced up by my belly button.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Just plug in while I'm sitting at my laptop, be able to plug in for the equivalent of sleep. That would be pretty good too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Zach, for being here. Friends, thanks for listening. And I will actually, Zach, before we drop, how can
Mhm.
people find you? Tell them very quickly what you specialize in and who you mostly work with as it
Sure.
relates to your program.
Yeah, I would say if people are just trying to be be aware of my existence a little bit more, I would say go to my Instagram is my largest platform. Zach Mental Load Coach, Zach with a H. But if you're loving this and you're like, I need this guy to talk to my husband, we can leave a link for my mental load mastery program. It is a 8-week program that the guys go into. They I have office hours, 4 hours per week. So on Monday through Thursday, if they're feeling stuck, they can show up to one of those office hours, get help from me. There's two one-on-two calls that I encourage for those first couple months. The goal is not for it's a community experience. The goal is for the guys to do the work. When they hit a certain level of doing the work in the community, they get lifetime access for free. I have about 10 guys that have earned that. So the goal is to really incentivize not having to put skin in the game anymore and not have to pay me anymore, but just being like community leaders within that system, and the spouses have their own community, so I can be in contact with them too. We have Fair Play 102 within that community, which every other week we discuss a new minimum standard of care of a area around the house, in a small group setting. So if people are interested in that, you can start a 7-day free trial from the link. Um, Jump in, grab the onboarding call, talk with me about whether it's a good fit for you. But yeah, that's how I help people mostly these days. While I'm scaling down a little bit while I'm working on the book proposal, and then I'll probably go back to having a couple more live sessions rather than just those four.
Perfect. Well, I will certainly link the mental load mastery below. So y'all can get that in the show notes. And Zach, I really appreciate how you've structured it to incentivize people to actually get the job done. Because as I'm sure, uh, just as I feel, you're probably the same way. Like we're here just as much to make a difference as we are to make a living. um, to really change the trajectory of the generation that we're raising right now. So
Mm.
I just appreciate that you have structured your program as it is to make that more systemic difference. So thank you again for being here. In the show notes, I'm also going to link how to more productively manage your to-do list and keep it from controlling and overwhelming you. So you can get my free guide. In it, I break down the difference between a to-do list and a wish list and how that can be used to simplify what it is that you do on a day-to-day basis, which will inherently reduce your mental load in very different ways than Zach's talking about. So I'll link that below. But until next time, if nobody's told you lately, you're doing a great job. You've got this, Mama.